Hi, I'm Royce Morales. I am a transformational facilitator, spiritual teacher, founder of Perfect Life Awakening, and I host a radio show called Listen Up with Royce Morales. My last video, I started talking to you about higher consciousness, that part of us that is who we really are. And I want to talk today about some more qualities about being higher self and the difference between lower self and higher self attitude about things. If you didn't listen to the previous video, you might want to go back and listen to it first, because I'm going to kind of allude back and forth to it, and it'll make more sense if you have backup information. So just to kind of remind everybody, who we really are is a higher consciousness being. Whether we know it or not, whether we function from it or not, we are higher consciousness. And what's getting in the way, of course, is our fears and our programmed beliefs and our fear-based consciousness that tries to convince you that you're not, and tries to convince you that you're just this body and you've got to protect it and do things and believe things, otherwise you're going to die. So I want to talk about the difference between a higher consciousness attitude and a fear-based lower consciousness attitude, and just kind of give you a scenario so that you can really see the difference. You can really kind of see it in black and white terms. So let's pretend for a minute that something really bad happens. You go out for dinner and you come back and you find out that your house burned down. Ooh. So how would your lower self feel about that? Your lower self would immediately, if you're functioning from a lower self place, it would immediately feel like a victim. It would be just devastated. There would be all kinds of horrible emotions about it. And why me? And that horrible, pitying, victim-y place would immediately get triggered. Second thing that probably would happen is that you would start looking around trying to blame somebody for it. Somebody must have done this, and who did this, and how did this happen, and try to put a lot of blame about the situation. You would probably have an attitude of some sort of belief being triggered. Well, that's the way life is, you have a house and it gets burned down. So there'd be some kind of a belief that would start reciting itself in your brain. You would be futilely trying to manipulate or try to get things to be different in some way. It's like, why did this happen? And oh God, if I had only not gone out to dinner, it wouldn't have happened. So there'd be a sense of futilely trying to manipulate or change it in some way. Needless to say, you'd be very angry and resentful at what happened. You'd be just horribly upset and devastated. You would probably have some judgment about what happened. All of these things are basically what I described in terms of what it feels like when a button gets pushed. So needless to say, this is a big button that would get pushed. Try to revenge. A lot of times when something really horrible happens, your lower self immediately wants to get revenge. It's like, I'm going to find out who did this and I'm going to burn down their house, or I'm going to sue them, or whatever. So a lot of revenge would probably come up, probably seek restitution of some kind. A lot of times when something negative happens, the lower self immediately wants to get some kind of an agreement, pity, or, oh God, you poor thing that this happened to you, so it's going to get all kinds of agreement. And sadly, we hold on to this probably for the rest of our life. We tell the story over and over again. Well, when my house burned down and this horrible thing happened to me, just simply so that other people can say, oh, you poor thing. And we hold on to that forever. It becomes our story. It becomes our reason. It becomes our, shut down from happiness and love because of it. And I've had people in my classes that, they share this story about what happened to them, and it's fresh each time. And everybody in the room would go, oh my God, that's really awful. And there's part of their lower self that just kind of eats that up and says, ooh, yeah, I got more attention and love and validation from that horrible thing that happened to me. which is why we hold on to it forever, which is the last thing that I want to mention in terms of describing what happens. We hold on to it forever. We're unable to let it go. We're unable to imagine life without holding on to that story. So that's what the lower self would do if we got home and found out our house burned down. Now, let's talk about how the higher self would cope with that or deal with that or respond to that. Now, keep in mind, not many people have reached the level of pure higher selfdom. So I can't imagine anybody really doing this 100%. And please don't try to fake it. You know, if something happens to you, don't try to jump into that higher self place without going through how your lower self feels about it, because all you're going to be doing is pushing it down and it's going to come up in some other way. But just listen to this description in terms of something to strive for, something to aim for, something to kind of plant in your mind as a little seed that someday I'm going to be able to get there. Okay, so we get home, house burns down. Higher self would very quickly start asking some inner questions about it, processing the fears and beliefs that come up. It's like, oh, wow, this is really bringing up a lot of fear in me and a lot of beliefs are being triggered in me. What do I need to look at from this? So there would be an immediate desire to start processing and doing the inner work about it, and at least acknowledging that some buttons were pushed rather than buying into those buttons and thinking that that's the way it is. We see it as just a button. The second thing that the higher self would do, which is kind of part of the first thing, is to trust that there's some sort of higher reason that this happened. I know that's hard, but trusting that there's some reason that I am going through this. What am I supposed to learn from this? Why am I experiencing this? What is this about for me? And you can do all of this kind of little inner processing going on in your head all the time. It doesn't have to be your house burning down. It could be all the time in terms of being mindful and conscious in your life. Asking to see the higher purpose may not happen instantly. There are things that I experienced in my life that took years for all of it to unfold in terms of what I was supposed to learn and what was the higher self lesson behind it, the higher purpose. So be patient with all of that. The other thing is that the higher self would in some way take responsibility. Now, there's a big difference between taking responsibility and taking blame. Okay, responsibility is just, I chose this for some reason. I attracted this. I needed to go through this. I am responsible for this in my life versus, oh, I'm terrible. This was a terrible thing that I did. And, I feel so guilty and I'm blaming myself. That's very, very different. Two different parts of you. One would be the lower self and the other would be the higher self. Responsibility is a higher self place. Blame and guilt is a lower self place. Very different. But the higher self says, yeah, on some level, I'm responsible for this. And again, I wonder why. Why did I attract this? Why did I need to go through this? Now, what happens on a higher self level, once we kind of process through all of that and get in touch with all of it, you're able to let it go. There are things that have happened in my life that I know they happened, but there's no charge on them. There's no need for me to keep rehashing it and telling people about it. It's like, yeah, this happened. Okay. But I've basically let go of that, that oomph about it. And last but not least, I know this might sound hard, but on a higher self level, I was mentioning that how to tell if somebody is a higher self person, they've got that twinkle in their eye. They're able to laugh at things. A higher self level of looking at things would very quickly be able to laugh at it, or what I call reaching the cosmic joke about it. So, yeah, I know that might sound a little bit lofty to try to attain those levels, but again, just kind of trust that if you process through things and you get in touch with the lower self part of it, and you shift over to the higher self part of it, you will get there. Don't try to fake it. Okay, So I want to talk now about how lower self issues and buttons and all that stuff can actually assist you in getting to a higher self place. And I have kind of a funny story that I'm going to recite to you that will show you how by just processing and focusing on some of your lower self buttons, you can get to a higher self place, not by suppressing them, but by really looking at them and digging through them, etc. So, all right. Now, what I'm basically saying is you're not buying into your buttons, you're using them as teachers. That's the difference. You're not saying this button and this feeling that I have is real. It's just a button. It's just fear being triggered. And how is it taking me to my higher self? So here's my step-by-step story. And we'll talk about Mary. Okay. So Mary's invited to a party, and Mary immediately notices that she has some lower self issues coming up about going to this party. She's noticing that she's feeling a little tense, a little nervous. She's noticing some anger. She's noticing that her body is like saying, I don't really know if I want to go to this party. She's noticing that she's getting sleepy. She's getting a headache, all kinds of physical reactions to this invitation to a party. Clearly, she's in a button about it. So those are the hints that a button is being pushed, especially feeling sleepy. I mentioned that before, that's a really good indicator of a button going on. So instead of throwing the invitation away or just pretending it didn't happen or going to the party anyway and just pushing through it, she starts talking to her lower self. She starts addressing her fear-based consciousness. So what's going on, lower self? Why the resistance and why the button about going to a party? And she hears clearly from her lower self, it says to her, parties are boring. So she notices immediately that that's a belief. Some parties might be boring and some parties might be fun and some parties might be just parties. So that broad generalization is showing her that there's some kind of a belief coming up about parties. So she goes a little bit deeper. She ponders it. She remembers going to a party a couple weeks ago and it was boring. Okay. So instead of saying, yeah, all parties are boring, she says, okay, well, that's just evidence to my lower self that I have some kind of a belief about parties be boring. So parties are boring. So what is that really about? She goes a little deeper. She calls up Royce and she says, gee, Royce, I'd like to get to the source of why I have this belief about parties. Or she does it with her journal and in her meditation, but I highly recommend having some assistance with this because it might be a little bit deep. So let's say Mary is able to do it by herself, and she gets in touch with a memory that when she was 2 years old, her mom dragged her to a party. She couldn't find a babysitter, and her mom was drinking, and she forgot all about Mary, and Mary was sitting in a chair and fell asleep, and her head landed in the hors d'oeuvres. Okay, so that is a decision-forming moment for her. And as you recall, decision-forming moments are moments of pain and loss, where you make some decisions about yourself and others in life. And so right then, Mary decided that parties are boring, mom abandons me, I make a fool of myself with my head landing in the cake, etc. So there were all kinds of decisions about parties that she made right then. Plus, she got all kinds of attention from everybody. Her mom jumped to her rescue and took her home and cleaned her up and apologized, and she got all kinds of love and attention for being the victim at this party. Okay? And that's really important because when you get attention from those events, they kind of lock in even further. They become what I call a reward system. So her lower consciousness or fear-based consciousness now was rewarded for having her head land in the cake. So part of her likes to go to parties because she's going to get guaranteed attention, but she also has this notion that parties are boring and dangerous and mom abandons me at parties. So you kind of see that there's a lot of little dualities going on, a lot of contrasts here, contrasting beliefs going on. So Let's talk about how this particular event or this particular button that she's feeling about going to a party can actually help awaken her to her higher consciousness. So she's now reached the point where she's reached the bottom, the source of what's going on about her and parties. And if she takes it a little bit further, she's going to see that it's an incredible lesson, that getting in touch with this decision-forming incident, this fear-based programming incident that she just got in touch with has been an incredible awakening for her to realize that, you know, some parties are okay to go to, some aren't. Maybe I just need to trust my intuition, which party to go to. So my higher consciousness can tell me that now, and I don't have to have this reactiveness about parties. So what an incredible teacher that is. And I have to add this because it kind of makes it full circle in terms of using these fear-based incidents to assist us. But Mary, in her amazing work, discovering things about parties, then realized that, you know what, I'm supposed to be a party planner. I'm supposed to create these amazing, joyous events for people because I went through so many horrible parties that I'm now realizing that my higher purpose is to be a party planner. And I know that sounds silly, but maybe that's how it works for her. And maybe if you start looking at some of these incidents and taking them way down to the bottom source, you're left with these incredible higher self lessons. And maybe they are about awakening you to your purpose. You just never know. So how do we awaken to our higher self? Well, as I keep saying, you already are a higher self person. It's just a matter of accepting it and awakening to it and being open to it, etc. So you kind of really don't have to awaken to it, which sounds like a catch-22, especially because I'm going to give you ways to awaken to it. But again, the truth is you already are. It's just a matter of being conscious of how awakened you are. So here are some suggestions in terms of how to be more awake and aware to your higher self. You can ask to be aware. The universe, I say this a lot, but the universe is a yes machine. So when you ask for something, it will provide it. So ask to be awakened to your higher self. So you could actually ask it to help you remember times that you were aware and conscious of your higher self, because chances are you were. I know in my life, I look back on it and all those weird experiences that I had that didn't make any sense, they were my higher self trying to reach me. So just ask, the universe definitely will provide. Ask to invite your higher self back. You know, it's like, it's been kind of waiting in the corner, waiting for you to be ready to receive it. So it's like, come on back, higher self. So ask it, because it'll come back. I'm one of these people that needs proof. You know, I was born with a very skeptical mind. I know I talk about things that sound like, you know, you're not skeptical at all. You believe all kinds of things. And that's true now because I've gone through the proof level of it. So I asked for a lot of proof for my higher self. I said, okay, if this stuff is true, you better show it to me, and you better show it to me in big ways. So be careful what you ask for, because you'll get it. But definitely ask for proof and be willing to receive it, be open to receive it as well. Sometimes your higher self shows up in dreams. It shows up in those intuitive flashes. It also shows up with what I refer to as messengers. So you're walking down the street and you walk by somebody and all of a sudden you hear them say something and your ears perk up and it's like, oh, that was my higher self talking to me. You know, so be open to that. It's really interesting. A lot of time, you know, maybe a friend will call you up and just out of the blue say something that just went, huh? You know, and that could be your higher self giving you a message through your friend. People say all kinds of things and they don't know why. And it could just be that they're channeling that energy for you so that you can hear it. Your higher self shows up in what I refer to as, quote, coincidences. So a lot of things that are that you look at and go, wow, that was a weird thing that happened, or that was a strange coincidence. That's your higher self showing up for you. So be mindful of that. There's so many times that I'll just be doing something and all of a sudden it's like, wow, why did that happen? Well, it woke me up. It brought me out of my lower self days and it said, okay, here's your higher self. We just want you to wake up. There it is. You can begin to communicate with your higher self just the same way that you communicate with your fear-based lower self. I gave you some clues in terms of how to do that. The same thing holds true for your higher self. So you can give it a positive, wonderful name as well, and just start communicating. Ask it questions. It will tell you things. Especially that very first sense of something is always your higher self trying to communicate with you. But ask it questions and be willing to hear those answers. I find that the more value that you put on wanting to be a higher self person, the more support you're going to get for that in all kinds of really interesting ways. And again, as I said in my last taping, being a higher self person is a huge commitment to your life, and you truly deserve it. So start asking and trusting and being willing and listening up to your intuition, because it will start communicating with you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you got some value from this. If you have questions or comments or want to reach me, just leave it in the comments section or reach out to me on my website, roycemorales.com. And I look forward to the next time I get to share all of this fascinating, fun, amazing information with you. Thank you.